Oh, hello there. Thanks for joining us for our first Venoge Fireside stream. Welcome, friends and subscribers. We're so glad you joined us. I'm Lori Lapenna. For those of you who know me, but are still wondering, why am I here and what are you doing? And for those of you who don't know me, I became involved with Venoge recently, but we've been attending Venoge events for 9 years since we moved back to Switzerland County. How we got involved was we were at the local grocery store 9 years ago, and we saw a handsome young couple in line, and they were dressed in period gear. And we said, what are you doing? They introduced themselves, and it was Amy Liebert and Brian Cushing. They're from the Victorian bar room, which some of you are very familiar with them as well. But they told us about the event that they were doing, so we came out and we started visiting many of the events, and now we're a part of the family. So thank you for joining us tonight, and I'd like to introduce you to Mrs. Weaver, our director. Hi, Mrs. Weaver.
Hello, Mr. Lapenna. Are you going to be handling the chat?
Yes, I am. As a matter of fact, please give us your questions, your comments. We'd love to hear from you, and I'll relay those back to Mrs. Weaver and our guest tonight.
We are so thrilled that everybody's here. Going to go back 30 years to when my husband and I walked through that door over there into a derelict house, knowing that it was going to be torn down, and we had questions. And from those questions developed into what we have right now. We started in 1995 doing some very small events. We built up, and now we're live streaming. It's been an interesting journey. We've learned a lot. We want to share what we've learned also with you folks. Switzerland County was founded early 1800s by Swiss vintners, French Swiss vintners, who came to establish a wine industry, and they did. They became the first vintner, first commercial winery in the United States. That's a big deal. Competing with Philadelphia, and we're on top. We came by this house accidentally, like I said. It was going to be torn down. But since then, we've been able to gather people like the Lapennas and some other people and work with us and build something up and promising the history. We're in the southeastern corner of Indiana. Look us up. But for those of you who are in the reenacting community, yes, this is a real fire. You'll know what I mean. For those of you who are familiar with us and those of you who aren't, we'd like to show a very short intro video. To begin, let's go back to a derelict building slated for destruction and some inquisitive people who loved history. Acquiring the property, they uncovered the original design and stories of its first occupants. The restoration took 16 years. It paid off by winning a prestigious preservation award. What was their next step? They held living history programs, but those audiences were limited to the local population. A broader appeal was necessary. A YouTube channel would reach people 24/7. From 2 subscribers to now almost 2,200, in some ways they came full circle. Some of you are seeing this live, just like those early events they sponsored. Others are seeing a video replay, available around the world 24/7. What dreams lie ahead? At Musée de Venoge, we like to say, there is so much untold history yet to be revealed. We're glad you joined us on our journey to find out. Our first guest this evening on the very first live stream is Steve Abolt. A lot of you probably know him. He's been associated with Venoge since about when, Mr. Abolt?
2015, after we finished the 200th anniversary of the Battle of New Orleans. Lance Minnis, a very dear friend of mine, said, you know, you really need to come up to Indiana. And of course, my family on my father's side is from Indiana. They were one of the first families in what is now Fountain County, Indiana, in 1822. They had moved into what was known as the Shawnee Reserve. So I have Indiana roots. My mother's family were from Italy. She's a first-generation American. And so we were always taught about American history, and it was interesting to see where you had one family that had been here almost since the beginning, and then a new American family, and to see how those two families melded together were really quite wonderful. And I was always taught the value of history. For example, up in Fountain County, we would go to the old cemetery where the first Abolts were buried that had immigrated here in 1807 from Germany. And then we would travel around to Civil War battlefields, of course, during the Civil War centennial in 1960. And from that grew a love of history. And I've been doing living history now, it's hard to believe, for 40 years. And I do want everybody to know, yes, as she said, that's a real fire, for those of you who've asked that question. And yes, sitting next to this fire, don't let anybody tell you differently. I'm hot in this thing right now. All right.
I'm just toasty on
You're
one
just
side.
toasty on one side. But the nice thing here about Venoge, Donna, that we've been able to do since you asked me to become a part of this, is to go on the journey that you and your late husband started on. You come to this house, and for those of you who've never been here, it's just a small little cottage. What is it, 20 feet by 20 feet?
18 by 24.
Or 18 by 24. It's a story and a half. And I know Joe Erdman, my good buddy, my cameraman, when we had convinced Donna, oh, we're going to come up and we're going to do a movie for you. He, of course, lives in Florida, and he was looking the place up online. And he had gone to Google Earth, and he brought it up. He looked at this little house. He goes, that's it?
And he's not the only one that said that either.
We're going to Indiana for this? But once you get here, and for those of you who have never been here, there's a magic to this place. We go to great battlefields or great homes of, you know, the famous people. And Will Durant once wrote a comment where he said, civilization is the streams, or a stream with banks. And everybody notices the stream. That's war and everything, because that's the most vibrant part of the scene. Nobody notices the banks.
Yeah.
But it's on the banks where people build their homes and start families. And he said, the story of civilization is a story of what happens on the banks. And even though I did military living history for 40 years, there's something now, as I've reached this stage in my life, of representing this particular time period. Not the stream, but the banks. And you can actually do that when you come here to this particular site. You get a definite feeling for the people who once lived here. And the amazing thing when you come here is you had 9 people living in here. Mm-hmm. Now, right now, there are 4 or 5 of us in this room with all the equipment, and it's crowded. No beds, nothing. But you can imagine 4 or 5 people. And if you've all been following the weather, it's going to get rather cold. So, as my wife would say, we've been burning Atlanta here in the fireplace for the last 2 days.
And it feels great in
and
here
it feels
right
great
now.
right now. But I can tell you, I've got enough weather stripping and newspaper and holes right now trying to seal the cold air from coming in. But you do get a very good idea of what it must have been like. And I think that's where we want to go tonight, Donna, with this discussion, the value of living history. And why is it important? Why is it important for individuals like us to wear funny clothes, as we like to call
I
them?
don't think they're that funny.
If you've seen some of the tailoring I've had, they're funny. And, of course, making clothes is pretty much what I do for a living. But you put on the attire, and that's part of what you're attempting to do. But what most people don't realize when you talk about living history, it's more than the clothes you put on, it's more than the gun you carry, it's more than anything.
Oh, it goes deep, 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 deep.
Well, when you're my size, it doesn't go too deep. But it's your inside. I spent a lot of years as a professional actor. And one thing you were always taught is acting is believing. And if you don't believe what you're doing, you really can't portray it. You can't get anybody interested.
Yeah, nobody cares.
Nobody cares. But if you believe it and can carry that forward and animate these, remember, these are just inanimate items. It's what comes out from within that makes the past come alive for people. You can go to a museum and you can see dusty artifacts on a shelf. And you go, oh, wow, so-and-so, used that. But it didn't bring it to life. I'll tell you one story. About 10, 12 years ago, the National Endowment of the Humanities had asked me to reproduce Robert E. Lee's surrender uniform, the one he wore at Appomattox, and it had been touring the country. It was supposed to be in St. Louis. I was going to fly to St. Louis to see it, but it went to New York City. We didn't get the contract finished until then. And I told them, I don't go to New York City. You'll pick me up at the airport. You'll do all that. Anyway, we were downtown Manhattan, and they take the uniform out of the case for me so I can examine it. Now, I've examined many, many uniforms and reproduced them over the years. And, of course, you couldn't take it off the mannequin. We couldn't set it on a table. And they had it on the ground for me. Well, I had to get up underneath it because I had to see the interior construction. Mm-hmm. And I had a flashlight with me, and I'm laying on the ground.
Oh, I'd like to picture it.
Setting a flashlight. And all of a sudden, I just burst out laughing. And the woman from the museum says, what's so funny? I says, I'm shining a light up Robert E. Lee's dress. And it's that moment where you go, this uniform had a connection. I had worked at Appomattox, and here we were taking a look at it. And it's those kind of moments that bring you closer to the past. And as you've often heard me say, Donna, if the past isn't relatable to the present, then it's not important. If you look at our country today, in some ways we've become unmoored. And I've always said that history is a rudder on a ship. It's behind you, but it steers you to where you're going. And if you throw your rudder away, well, you're pretty much adrift. And I think that's why living history now is more important than ever. And as my wife said, I like to hear myself talk. And, I never wanted to be on an episode of Drunk History, but I guess this is part of it.
We can do it now.
So I'm having a Sazerac here for those of you who know me, especially Tim Kaine, if you're out there. This one's for you, buddy.
And I'm having whiskey punch, first introduced to us by the Victorian Bar Room in Julep's Songs and Jacob's Punch.
Correct. Episode 5, Songs for or Beverages for Election Day.
Brian Cushing and Amy Liebert, good stuff.
So one thing, again, we're going to be jumping around and shotgunning a lot of times tonight, but getting to the value of living history. And this museum being small and being pretty much in the middle of nowhere, if we can't make this story relatable to people, what's the point of saving it? I can remember during the bicentennial, 1976, everybody all over the country was saving structures. And then it was like, now what do we do?
Yeah, now what?
And you're stuck with it.
You got to maintain it. You've got to do something with it. You can't just,
Correct. So the question then becomes, all right, how are we going to make this relatable? Why should the average guy that drives by, and if you've listened to any of our videos and watched some of our outtakes, it's the Indianapolis 500 out there, folks.
And there goes one
And there goes one right now. In fact, you will probably hear if you watch some of our outtakes, it's like, hold on, we got a vehicle. But at least tonight, with the live stream, you can now hear pretty much what we hear.
Yes, we don't have to stop talking.
But you have this isolated place, and we wanted to bring it out to people. How are we going to do that? Okay, how are we going to do that? And I had convinced Donna that Joe and I, my buddy from Florida, I said, we can do a video for you kind of telling your story. And she had found Jacob Weaver's letters. And that's how this whole YouTube thing got started, is we made a full-length picture called To Make a Beginning.
Yes.
All right, and it's based on Jacob Weaver's letters. We had a grand premiere of it here in Vivi. pronounced Venoge back then, and filled the theater up. And it was just wonderful. And then we took a look at that, and we said, we've reached these people here. We need to reach people 24/7 around the world. And pretty much that's what we're doing here tonight.
I just want to tell you of a few people who are tuning in. We have Gettysburg, Pennsylvania.
Oh, yay.
Yeah, that's Mr. Hawkinsmith, I believe. And we also have Michigan tuning in, and they were talking about the beautiful rolling pastures and how well the program is done.
Wonderful.
And Mrs. Williard, in regard to what you're talking about, writes in saying, there's no better way to learn, study history than actually to immerse yourself in it.
Absolutely.
Experiencing the clothing, which we know Mrs. Williard.
Yes, we know.
If you haven't seen Mrs. Weaver and Mrs. Williard, you need to check out the YouTube channel with their productions. They're great. And but anyway, she also wanted to know if we can see these tonight's broadcast later.
Oh, yes.
for
Oh, yes,
those-
it's-
Yes,
yes.
yes, we're going to, it'll be a replay.
Alrighty.
And for the gentleman from Gettysburg, my wife and I, she was a park ranger at Appomattox. And we would go to Gettysburg all the time, you know, it was only 4 hours away from Lynchburg. Always stay at the Cashtown Inn was always our favorite place. So she and I have tramped that battlefield many, many times. And when I worked at Appomattox doing living history, I portrayed a member of the Appomattox Grays, which was Company H of the 18th Virginia, which was in Garnett's brigade, of course, and was captured at Pickett's Charge. So Gettysburg has always had a special, you know, I've had a special affinity to that. It's just another story. Years ago, this was probably 1970, my parents had taken us to Gettysburg, and I was just so excited. I would be at Gettysburg, right? Well, we had a camper, and they went to get some milk, but I didn't hear them say, oh, we're going to go get some milk. Don't go away. So I came out of the visitor center, the old cyclorama, if you were there.
I remember that.
Yeah, well, that building's no longer there. And I said, where's the camper? There's nobody here. Oh, they took off without me. So I walked the 15-mile auto trail on there. They had park rangers from Adams County and everywhere else trying to find me.
I never heard that story.
Oh, no. They found me, and I didn't sit down for a while.
How did you get into, if you started 1860, how did you jump back to 1812?
I didn't start doing Civil War. My main interest was 1830s. All right.
Oh, Mexican.
And living in Texas, of course, the Alamo, and then the Mexican-American War, 1846 through 48. And then in 1989, we did a living history program for the National Park Service at Chalmette, the Battle of New Orleans. And I ran that program for almost 30 years. And, of course, working towards the big bicentennial event back in...
That was fantastic.
Back in 2020. So early Republic is something that I'm very interested in because we have moved so far away of many of the ideas of the early Republic. And it's very difficult today for people to understand individual responsibility, it seems, accountability, and the fact that you alone have to make choices in your life. No one makes them for you. And just on a separate hook, when we got the grant to do August Afternoon from Americana Corner, that was the bent that we tried to take with the film, is to show different families on an August day in, was it
1839.
1839, and how they were all different. But
Everybody moving.
That everybody was
Country
moving.
was on the move.
And everybody had the opportunity to be whatever they wanted to be, but it was up to them to make it happen. Didn't make a difference what social strata you were in.
No.
You had to do it. No one was going to come and hand you something.
You had to grab it.
Right. So that's why, again, I think living history is so important because you can take your visitor to a different time. One problem that I've always found with some living historians, and I think it's one of the greatest errors you get here, is they comment. They're doing a first-person portrayal, we'll say. and they begin to make comments on it by the way they're performing it. And that's not the way you do it. You have to be that person. You have to express the viewpoints, whether you agree with them or not. In that time period.
With the whole mores of the time
Everything.
period.
It is the job of the audience then to make their own decision of, what do you intend to do? All right, what am I going to do? What am I going to take with this story? I'm glad we did this. I'm not glad we did that. Yeah. But one of the greatest pitfalls today is you cannot judge these people by your standards
no.
any more than you want to be judged by standards.
Nope.
200 years, in the present.
No, it's not.
I think
no.
The other
and you get that by reading primary documentation.
You read primary sources. That's it. All right. When we were reading the letters of Jacob Weaver, and Jacob Weaver's father had fought in the American Revolution.
Yes.
They were from Ulster County, New York, which really had been civilized and settled for 150 years.
Yes. He came from that civilized area
Right.
down to essentially the wilds.
And he was a literate man. But what is very interesting when you read his letters, one, he never met a punctuation mark that was his friend. All right? There are no punctuation marks. And you have to read it for sense. But also, many of the words he used, he spelled phonetically. And by taking that phonetic writing, it allowed you to actually hear his voice. And this is how he spoke. And when I'm writing scripts, for example, for our YouTube channel, one of the things is to try to place that dialogue.
For Tales from the Tavern.
Yes, in the vernacular of the time. How do we relate? All right. Now, just tell you another story. All right.
Another story? I'm surprised.
After 40 years.
I'm surprised.
After 40 years. All right. All right. Again, when you're doing living history, my wife and I were doing living history at Appomattox, and again, you have to engage these people. They don't know you, and you're dressed differently. And of course, we would always do something where the ranger would bring out the tours, and he would call across to us at the tavern across the way, and we would meet them, and we'd have a little banter with the park guide, and then they would turn the audience over to us, and we would take them and do, our program for them. But then, of course, during the rest of the day, you were wandering around through the village, but you still had to engage the people. So, you've heard me a million times when we're doing something. We got to have a gimmick. We have to have something to engage the audience. So my gimmick to engage the people that came to Appomattox was I had a pet stick. And my pet stick's name was Slim. And I would allow the kids to pet the stick, and I would have the stick do tricks for the kids. And of course, they would say, hey, you can't do that. I said, really? Well, watch this. And I put the stick down, and I would say, play dead. The stick wouldn't move. I said, okay, anybody can teach a stick that. I said, watch this. And then I'd walk away again, and I'd say, stay. And then finally I'd pick it up and go, okay, one more trick. And I'd point to it, and I'd say, bark. All right, a simple little thing like that, but it broke the ice that you had with the audience.
You can talk.
Where they could talk to you, because that is always the problem that you have in any first-person situation. How do I relate to this person so I can teach a history lesson to them and allow them to make their own conclusion? And again, that's what we're trying to do here at Venoge with our YouTube channel.
We do some first person here on site, but mostly it's third person. We're trying to tell who lived in this house, how they lived in this house, with the one big room downstairs with 9 people, a sleeping room upstairs and a storage room. Mostly you're outside working, but that's what we're trying to get across. And this is an average house.
But see, I think that's what makes this cottage so interesting. Is I've done programming. I did programming for the Hermitage for several years. Planned programs for them. Had a fantastic time. Did some excellent first-person living history. And of course, you couldn't really go into the mansion, but we went around, and there's a very powerful feeling in that. I love the Hermitage, and I've always supported the programs that they do. But you come here, and it's a very intimate feeling. And because of the size, I mean,
Oh, it's
literally,
very- yeah,
literally,
it's-
folks, the
it's-
wall
yes.
is just right over there.
Yeah.
All right.
10 feet away.
All right.
May I cut in?
Yes.
I would like to acknowledge Joseph Hawkinsmith, the gentleman we mentioned earlier.
Oh, yes.
And he said, interestingly enough, I've lived my whole life in Gettysburg, but my living history journey has me in the mid-1700s. I appreciate all history, especially the day-to-day of early America. And he also said, when you said earlier about it comes from feelings within, you nailed it.
Thank
That's
you.
what Mr. Hawkinsmith
No,
said.
thank you very much, sir. I truly appreciate that.
And a shout out to Cheryl Swartz. She is also viewing, I think, let's see, I forget where she's from. I'm sorry, Cheryl. I lost that. But we also, it says North Dearborn. So thanks for tuning in, Cheryl.
And Cheryl, I appreciate it. I was getting kind of dry because I was talking so much. All right.
He needed a
And
break.
Bless you. Bless you, Cheryl. Just thank you. Thank you so much. You know, one of my favorite movies is the John Wayne Alamo. And there's one line in it with Lawrence Harvey and John Wayne. And John Wayne's pouring whiskey for Lawrence Harvey. And he says, wet our whistles. Words are dusty. Talking's dry work. And sitting by this fire, folks, it's real dry work right now. So, yes. Anyway, let's
back to where you
back
were.
to where I was. We're going to talk a little bit. What I would like to talk about was again trying to engage the visitor and not burlesquing things. All right. So at Appomattox, I'm just going to use that because I was there for 3 years. My wife, Cinda. She was there, of course, before we were married and all of that. And she portrayed a character there. And you always had to engage, the visitor sometimes. So Patrick Schroeder, who's now the chief historian at Appomattox, he was doing the Federal soldier. I was doing the Confederate soldier. And we were sitting on the porch of the Clover Hill Tavern there at Appomattox. And it was a Sunday. And of course, the problem with Sunday, just like any event, whether it's here, whatever, Sunday is just a dead time.
It's slow.
It's slow. And all you're doing by Sunday morning is you're watching the clock. Going, when do we wrap this thing? But we were there a Sunday morning. And Appomattox, it's a very powerful place if you've ever been there.
By the way, Davis Longworth is listening in from Appomattox.
Oh,
from
really?
Appomattox.
Yeah, because I said, where is that? So, see,
See?
I learned something.
There you go. And Sunday is just a dead time, right? It's just a dead time. So Appomattox gets so quiet. It's amazing. At 5 o'clock when the place would close, the silence. It was amazing. But anyway, Sunday, we were out there, and he and I were doing our living history program. We had our scheduled talks that we had to do.
You were bored stiff.
We were
weren't you?
bored stiff. Okay. Let's just cut to the chase. And anyway, there was a young couple that had come. And he's walking the grounds. He was so excited he was at Appomattox. And he said, oh, look at the buildings. They're this. And she wanted nothing to do with it. And you could tell this guy he was in heaven, but she was putting him in hell because he was having a bad time. Well, anyway, he's trying to have some kind of connection with her to make her appreciate this stuff. And there was another family there, and they had a collie. And the dog was just running around the courthouse square. And he just says, hey, look, they got a dog. Dogs were invented before the Civil War.
Oh, I know that.
I turned to Pat Schroeder, the federal soldier. I said, we're running with this. And people would come to the park and they would have a dog and say, hey, you got one of them new inventions. You got a dog. And we would take it. We would take it from there. So you always have to have some way.
It was an in to get.
It was an in to your audience's mindset. I think the other thing that is so important, whether it's with acting and portraying living history, because in some ways they are. You're creating a persona, you're living it, is you can't be a good actor if you don't live life. You can't, if you don't experience life, you cannot portray it. And it's the same thing with living history. If you cannot live it, you can't accurately portray it. My wife and I, at many events, after hours would be doing first person. I mean, just us sitting in our tent. I was commanding Fort Jackson, which is down in Alabama. And it would just be us. And we would have the newspapers and we would read.
Oh, yeah, those are
and,
great.
and those kind of things. And it kind of gave you a better insight to things.
So how does that relate to what you're doing with Tales from the Tavern and the cooking
All
shows
right,
we do?
it's the same thing, is that we're taking the tavern, all right?
As a vehicle.
As a vehicle. So for folks, if you ever go to our YouTube channel and you look up Tales from the Tavern, what we did, again, I twisted Donna's arm. I said,
No, you didn't.
I still got the hospital bills from the bruises. All right. I said, look, we can take...
Oh, you paid them.
Yes.
Oh, good.
I said, we can take the house here, and I said, it will work great as a tavern. I said, we just have to, we pull the bed out, we pull all the furniture out.
And the dry sink is gone.
And the dry sink
Yes.
and everything else. And we just, again, I was thinking theatrical training. I said, we just make two hinged panels with the tavern front on it that can be easily removable, and we can create this into a tavern set.
You wanted a set, what we ended up
Yes,
with.
what I wanted was a simple set. I spent years with bus and truck shows and everything that collapses and it leaves and the theater goes back to the way it was. But John Marsh, the same gentleman who restored this house, that's real, folks. If you ever see this tavern cage, that's not a set. It's real. And John had built that, and it has become so popular that we don't have any plans right now of
Yes, we do.
taking this down. No, I still need a job, and we got to keep doing the show.
Okay.
All right, so we don't have any plans for that. But I came up with this idea of Cheers meets Prairie Home Companion. That was kind of the idea that I had, and we set it in a tavern so you could have a looser kind of format. It
But the
wouldn't be
raw
formal.
material came
But
from...
that's where I was going next. All right, so we have that framework. This is what we're going to do. And I mean, you got the fire, and for those of you who have been here for some of our tavern events, or even doing living history after the public leaves and we create it.
Oh, yes.
This space is magical. I mean, it really is. And you, like Joe said all those years, this is it? Yeah, this is it. And it is one of the most amazing places.
Capital I with a T. It.
Yes.
This is it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm so glad you can
We do
spell.
have a burning question. It doesn't really
It's
pertain-
burning. You ought to be on this side of the fire.
I bet. It doesn't really pertain to what you're talking about, but I've been telling two viewers that I will ask him. We're going to digress a bit and just ask, how did you get into tailoring? So,
That's good. How did I get into tailoring? All right, I will tell you. When I first started doing living history, all right, and I started in 1979. I was doing buckskinning, all right.
You're kidding.
Yes, I did that.
Okay.
I've stood in the mourner's bench and confessed my sins.
Okay.
All right,
Okay.
but
Say
they were
no more. Say
they
no
were
more.
wonderful people, and I learned a lot from them, and I'm always very appreciative of that. So that's how I got started, and that was 1979. And then in 1986, when the Texas sesquicentennial came around, they were doing a first-person total immersion Alamo event on the original John Wayne movie set out in Brackettville, Texas.
Oh, wow.
Okay. Which I burned down almost the very first night of the event, but that's another
story for
another
a
time.
late evening.
And,
Yes.
so in the theater I was working at, I talked to wardrobe, costume department. I said, hey, can you guys make me some 1830s stuff? And the costumer said, oh, yeah, we can do that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they can do that. So I bought some patterns online, and they had made some stuff. And I went and I did the event, and I looked at it and said, I can do this.
Yeah.
I can teach
This
myself to
doesn't
do
look
this.
quite right.
I mean, the only thing I had ever sewed before in my life, I tried to put a patch on a pair of blue jeans. The knee was torn out. Boy, I did a great job stitching the patch on. But what I didn't realize, you're supposed to put something so you don't sew the leg together. So I'd sewed the leg together. Oh, I was so proud of that. Tried to shove my leg down that. Nah, that wasn't happening. All right, so that's the only thing I'd ever sewed in my life. And So this is from 1986 now. Today is what, 40
at
years?
least,
And
yeah.
this is pretty much how I earn a living.
But you have an
tailoring.
attention to detail and a respect for the history
Yes.
and the original.
The point, as you ladies will attest by wearing the foundation garments and everything, today we're a blue jeans, t-shirt,
Flip-flops,
that kind of society. And form dictates function. And you can do just about anything because there's no restriction. Whereas this is very tight, as you can see in the sleeves. The chest is wadded and padded. The same thing here in the vest. And it creates, what you're trying to do in this time period is create a wasp-like figure with a very big
too.
chest.
We
And
all
a very
are.
nipped
Yes,
in
we all
mid-waist. But they restrict your movement. You can't
Oh,
do
no
the
kidding.
things
No kidding.
that you do today. But
Arm up this high.
yeah,
That's
well,
it.
let me take. Okay, so let's talk about what we're asking about tailoring, with the cut of the garment. The cut of these clothes, you can see how very high up under the armpit this is cut, and that's so I can raise my coat. You notice my coat doesn't go anywhere. You
Yeah.
put a blazer on today, you raise your arm up,
Yeah,
it goes up.
yeah.
So that is also one of the keys in tailoring for military uniforms, because a soldier's equipment prior to 1850 is carried over his shoulders. And the soldier has to be able to access his equipment. And if he's moving, he
Yeah,
can't
right.
if his armpit is not cut right.
So that's the old form follows function.
Form follows function. But the other thing that happens, because these are so high underneath the armpit, they have another function, which is to make you stand straight. Because if you slouch in something like this, right under here will bite into your armpits and become extremely uncomfortable. So it naturally makes you stand up.
That's why Mrs. Lapenna and I are sitting up very straight.
Yes, because of your foundational garments.
Yes, yes.
But that's how I started tailoring. God gave me a gift, and I thank Him for it. And that's the easiest way for me to say it.
Great answer. I have something for Mrs. Weaver, if you don't mind me butting in.
Yes.
Wow, man, I've had the cold shoulder before, but that was great.
Sorry, Steve.
That's okay, it gives me time to drink.
Yeah, oh, there you go. I thought you needed a break. So Joseph Hawkinsmith asked if Mrs. Weaver, do you still personally own the house?
Oh,
And
no,
go ahead.
It's a nonprofit organization. We're a 501c3. We did that immediately for a lot of reasons. And we function as a nonprofit 501c3. We have a board of directors. Lori is on the board of directors. I'm the president of the board. And that everything goes through us. We're not a membership organization, but that's what we are.
And here's another great question from Mr. Hawkinsmith. Have you ever stayed here overnight?
Oh, absolutely. Many, many times.
Absolutely,
It's
yes.
lovely. It is absolutely lovely. You can't beat it. You just can't beat it.
And that was, again, another, that living history moment, is I've always said you do these and you wait for the next moment.
Yeah. Few and far
And
between, but
they're
they're
few
wonderful.
and far between, but when you can actually experience it, and that veil between past and present is torn aside,
It's a time
and you
warp.
see it,
It's a time warp.
and you see it, but you can only see it briefly
I know.
because it closes again, and it's a narcotic, and you live for that next moment when you can experience that, and you become so excited about experiencing that moment, you want to share it with somebody. All right, when we did the Alamo event that I had put on in 1998, and it was total immersion. This was first person, total immersion. 1998. All right, in 1998 out at Brackettville. They had forgotten I had almost burned the movie set down.
That's another story.
That's another story, but I was allowed back there. And you were not allowed anything you couldn't carry in. And what we, of course, were portraying is most of the guys that were in the garrison had been living in San Antonio. When the Mexican army showed up, they fled, and except for the few that had anything in the mission, everybody else, you had to carry it in. So everybody, you didn't have a lot.
Yeah.
And it got cold, all right? And if you've ever been to West Texas, this was in February, it's cold. And you had guys rigging up arbors off of the adobe walls, and I was commanding the garrison. And so after everybody had got settled, Cinda, that's my wife, I said, I got to go walk post. I got to check everything. And she says, well, you mind if I come along? I said, no, not at all. And if you've never been in West Texas, the sky is amazing. All right. The best thing about West Texas is at night is you can't see it. All right. And there's nothing. All right. So
Great.
we had, I had to go up to the apse or the back of the church where we had a gun emplacement and to check on the cannoneers that were out there. And it was brilliant starlit night. And we walked up the dirt ramp that went to the cannon emplacement. And as you begin to walk up, the wall recedes down naturally as you begin to climb up, and the sky becomes apparent. And you got there. And here were these guys, rolled up in their blankets, everything, no fires, nothing, and just that starlight.
Crisp.
Oh my goodness. And Cinda looks at me, she says, if it ended now, it would be worth it. And you were there. It was an incredible experience. And you can get that here, like Donna will tell you. You can stay out here. Now, once you accept the fact there's a highway
Yes.
out there, it's amazing. You will transcend time, and you will get a greater appreciation on something. So again, let's talk, what's the value of living history? You can appreciate why you have the things you do.
Oh, yes.
And you can also say, thank goodness I don't live back then.
Yes. Many of us would have been
Yeah,
dead.
many of us would be dead.
Yeah.
That's right. But
And not a pleasant death.
we have a great idea of how to portray this or whatever. And everybody thinks, oh, you got to do living history and you have to be real straight-laced and whatever. You know, people were people.
People were people.
And-
People are people everywhere.
By the way, Laura Williard says Steve is correct in
Excuse me. Folks, having a woman tell me I'm correct, I got to relish this moment. Okay, excuse me.
Okay. She says that Steve is correct. I repeated that, yes. And that the veil is an awesome experience when it happens to you.
It is. And you can, you can talk about it, Lori. We can talk about it. But until
Let's.
you experience, no. But I mean, but
no,
I'm saying until you experience
it's
it.
existential.
Okay, I did the Mississinawa event here in Indiana. It was my favorite event. I just adore Mississinawa. I retired from there in 2019, and one of the reasons I loved Mississinawa so much is because it was out in the wilderness, and when the sun went down, it was dark, and all it was campfires, tents,
Yes.
candlelight,
Yes.
the music, people singing, and watching the shadows
Yes.
moving in and out. And I had two dear friends from Canada, Larry Lozon and Larry Studd, and they were portraying British officers, and they had come over to my camp, and they were going back over to the British camp. And of course, we were up on a hill, walking down into the other camps. And they said they were walking down, and all of a sudden, an Indian in full dress, everything, just stepped out of the trees, and he was lighting his pipe. And he said the sight of that, and the silhouette,
Yeah.
and everything, first of all, it scared him to death. But it was, I'm there. I see it. I appreciate it. And again, it's like, I got to go back because
You want that to happen
I want
again.
that to happen. And the other thing I think that's so important is it recharges your batteries.
As to the reason why.
Right. So when you're going to go and you're going to tell these stories, you can only recite countless facts for so long because at that point the audience is going, oh my Lord.
Feelings are so much more intense.
Right. And once you portray that person in a tone and in a manner that your audience can relate to, you've got them. And you can lead them in the direction that you want to. And again, we talk about, those moments. We were at Appomattox one year, and I had a gentleman from Great Britain had come over and with a friend of his, and I had done my presentation. And they cornered me afterwards. And the three of us were sitting cross-legged on the lawn between the Clover Tavern and the guest house, and I was doing first person. It was 6-7 hours. The park closed at 5 o'clock, and we were still. It was one of the most amazing things because they were into it too, and you realized you were having a conversation with somebody as if they were there. They were believing it. Ideas that you had, those emotions that you had in yourself as a character, things you had studied, you could bring those out and make them more real.
Yeah.
And that's why, again, I think, living history is
Yeah, I think
such a
everybody
value.
that's done living history on some level has had a moment where it's a time warp. I've seen people come out of the fog toward me, and it was just like, I'm back there. I'm 200 years ago, and it's just, you can't describe it.
Rolling Pastures Farms says the magic moment, it's like time traveling.
It is.
Absolutely.
It
yes,
is.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
And I think the other important thing, again, we're going to talk about time traveling and things like that. To be a good living historian is you need to have someone who can inspire you, all right, and you can learn from them. So when I first started doing this, I was rookie. I loved history. I watched, look, I grew up in the 1950s and 60s. So you watched The Lawman, Bonanza, Davy Crockett with Fess Parker, Daniel Boone. It was a
Gray Fox.
Yes, Swamp Fox. Swamp Fox, Gray Ghost. And that was, Swamp Fox was Leslie Nielsen, which was always interesting. He was playing Francis Marion and he was from Canada. So I was kind of
Get
out
over
of
it.
that.
Get over
but
it, Steve.
then there was the John Mosby, Gray Ghost is what they call
Yes,
me. John Mosby is my name. My wife Cinda had a crush on one of the actors from the Rough Riders.
We don't need to
Yes,
do that.
but anyway, it was
Cinda doesn't need to know.
it was a different time, and so you grew up with that appreciation of an early America, and that make-believe world that you were watching on television is what inspired me and has inspired so many people to go and learn and dig deeper. And that's what you want people to do. You can have 1 million books on the shelf, and if you never crack those books, they don't do you any good.
You
But
go to the primary source.
once that primary source is revealed to you, it's 1 million things. So you have, as a living historian, you want someone who will all of a sudden go, well, I got to be like him. And that person for me was a gentleman named Bill Gwaltney. All right, Bill
you told me about him.
Gwaltney is one of the most amazing living historians you're ever going to meet. I met Bill back in 1986 or 7 at Bent's Fort. Out
Is
there
that
in
in Texas?
That's Colorado.
Colorado.
It's part of the fur trade. We were doing a fur trade company that was out there, and I had been working in Amarillo, Texas, at a dinner theater there, and had done the Alamo event with some of these folks that were there, and they invited me to go. And I met Bill, and just watching Bill operate, he ran the event, and just watching Bill become the persona he was, and just sitting back and watch, he was amazing. And he just inspired me. It's like, I got to be like him. And Bill's career in the National Park Service and everything, Bill was an amazing man.
He had the knowledge behind
He had the knowledge
and
behind it,
the ability to transfer
and
it.
he had the amazing ability to transfer it to the public. You can meet plenty of historians that are really good book learners. My gosh, they'll quote you chapter and verse and footnotes.
Dry
but
as dirt.
Dry. But it doesn't bring it to life. Why should I care? Yes, that person cares, and they spent a whole life learning about that. But I want to reach, I'm a big Age of Jackson guy, the common man. I want to reach the common man. And that's why when we told August Afternoon, those stories were not about rich people or whatever.
It was just,
it was
every
the
man.
average,
Every man.
everyday Joe. And here is something you could relate to. Here was the kid trying to get up in the world, trying to be aggressive. Here's the riverboat captain. I mean, here's all these people. Here is Jacob Weaver wanting to better himself.
Yes.
But the subtext of that story is his wife is dying, and he can't take care of the place. And so it's today
So
where
they've got to change everything.
we have to change everything.
Yeah.
And what that story, and so many stories like it, makes you realize is you're no different than these people.
No, nothing changes.
Your hygiene is better, hopefully, but you
Now,
are
don't disparage Mr. Weaver. We don't.
I'm not disparaging Mr. Weaver, but that was the other thing with Bill Gwaltney. I'm not saying Bill Gwaltney smelled or anything like that, but Bill had a lecture. He didn't. He had two other living historians give the lecture that night. We're sitting around in one of the rooms at Bent's Fort, and the two guys were there talking about living history and said, "Oh, and the smells of living history." And for those of us, all right, the gentleman from Gettysburg, 40 years. I got a lot of stories. 40 years of living history stories in Gettysburg. All right, this was 1988, so this was the 125th. And we had flown up from Texas. I was the only responsible one. I had the credit card, so I had to rent the car. So we flew up into Reagan or Dulles, one of the two, and rented the car, and we drove up to Gettysburg. We were in the field for a week, okay?
Oh.
No change of clothes.
Oh.
We were in the field for a week, just sleeping on the ground. And the weather went from bitter cold to boiling hot. You freeze to death the first night, and then you die the rest of the time. So we had finished the event. We'd done the pick a charge segment of the event, and it was over, okay? So it was just all of a sudden, it was General Pickett's used car lot. I mean, thousands of cars being inundating the site. Well, we all get in the car, we strike our meager gear, throw it in the back of this car, drive back to D.C. Well, we get a hotel room, right? Okay, Stevie's got the credit cards.
Yeah,
he's got to get the hotel.
Okay.
All right, well, we didn't notice any smell or anything because we'd all been together. All together.
Yes, you acclimated.
And we checked into the hotel and took a shower. Well, I had to return the rental car. All right, it was mine. The rental car had been sealed. Folks, I opened the door to that rental car, and it just about knocked me over. I was driving around Washington, D.C., trying to find a head shop where I could get some Ozium. The car went back. I dropped it off, and the lot had a taxi.
What's Ozium, Mr. Abel?
I don't know. I wouldn't know. And I just felt sorry for the folks who were going to open that car during the night. But you do get
Well, think of the streets.
Oh, exactly. You have no appreciation.
Slops.
Yes, where you walk down the street and the slops come flying out of the windows above. And in some ways, let's talk about living history and pretending. You're pretending because you know
we can go.
Can go back. We go back
can
to
get clean.
The tower, the toilet, and the shower, and all of that. Central heat and air,
and our cell phones.
And a cell phone. And if you notice, folks, we have a hard and fast rule here at Venoge. On pain of death, there are no cell phones when we're filming because we have had them go off at the most inopportune.
Whose cell phone goes off the most?
Okay.
Neither confirm nor deny.
Question?
Davis Longworth, it has a comment. He says he loves all of your stories, Steve, about the times that you were in Appomattox. Is that how you say that?
Appomattox.
Appomattox. I knew I'd screw that up. I remember him and his wife very well, and I also worked in Colonial Williamsburg, where living history was wonderful.
It is.
Yeah.
That's the top of the game right there.
And let's go back to wardrobe, because we had a question, and Amy Liebert answered it very well for the lady, but she wants to know how many, not Amy, but a viewer, Rolling Hills Farms. She asked how many layers of clothing. For instance, I'll ask you the women, and then we'll let Steve answer for the men. So how many layers of clothing were typically worn?
Top or bottom?
I think complete.
Top just 3. Now you've got 4 because you've got a chemisette on.
Yes.
I don't have a chemisette. I just have a collar. Bottom 4.
This is the chemisette, by the way, and it actually tucks in and ties at the waist.
Underneath all that.
Yes.
And it keeps it, tying it in place, keeps it static where it has to be. Now mine's a collar that's sewn on, so it stays in place.
Well, for a man, if you go to an earlier period, some of the men would wear 2 vests.
Oh, really?
So I have a shirt, of course, which is my base layer. And that shirt goes down almost to my knees. This is my wedding shirt that my wife made for me many, many years ago. And of course, in many regards, your shirt was long because it was also your underwear. But you just tuck it. You were married. All right. You'd also have drawers because the problem is I've got woolen pants on now because it's wintertime. And I also have a jean cloth, which is a very scratchy cloth.
Oh,
it's
yes.
jean and cotton.
Yeah.
And you definitely want to have something on your lower legs.
Jean cloth is cheaper.
It's cheaper.
Yeah.
It's a very low cloth. Now today, of course, you're paying expensive.
Through the nose
for this, but it was a cheap cloth. A lot of ways, sometimes it was called slave cloth. All right, you would use that to Kentucky jeans.
I didn't know that.
Yes, and use that because it was so cheap, but it's very scratchy. So
Durable.
But durable, yes, it was durable, and it would give with the weave on it. The fabric will give. So I would have a long pair of drawers going down to about my knees. Then, of course, your stockings. And then, of course, the shirt. Now, sometimes in winter, you could have an undershirt. Sometimes they were made of silk.
That's warm.
It's very warm. And then over that, I have a vest and the jacket. Now, also remember in this, there's about a half to 3/4 of an inch of woolen wadding in my breast here.
To give you that pigeon.
To give it that pigeon look. And also in here. So this is like wearing a quilt. And then my uniforms, for example, my military uniforms, when we would
Which
be down.
Are exquisite.
Thank you. When you would be down in South Texas and we'd be doing Mexican War events on the Rio Grande, I went down with the heat.
Yeah.
It is so humid. And because if any of the guys out there who are listening still know, I'm a stickler for proper uniform. And I am buttoned and hooked all the way up to the throat all the time. And I remember reading accounts, again, you talk about first-person accounts, where some of the older officers in the Army are writing home, and they're talking about the younger officers just come out of West Point, they got their commission, they're buttoned to the throat and everything.
Yeah,
in
proper.
That heat.
Yes.
And Napoleon Tecumseh Jackson Dana, one of my favorite officers with the 7th Infantry.
That's quite a name.
It was quite a day. And he went around in a purple hickory shirt. That's what he wore. And he said, the wind carries the odor away, and I don't have to wash it that often. But he talks about the younger officers buttoned to the throat. So we were down there. We were at Port Isabel, which is right there at the mouth of the Rio Grande. And I was a stickler for uniform.
I'll bet you were.
Stevie's going to be buttoned to the throat. Stevie was buttoned to the throat with 3/4 to an inch of woolen wadding out to there. Stevie was a casualty.
Stevie went down.
He was down. And I mean, the other thing, you can ask my wife. Heat and I, not like this. And we were setting up our marquee. We live in southeast Georgia. And she looks at me and she goes, you are turning purple. And that's, heat and I don't, you get heat sick once.
Yeah.
And once you do get that, you do get an appreciation for it. And you read so many accounts of guys talking about falling out from the heat.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. So how does...
One more clothing question. Joseph Hawkins-Smith. What class would the dresses that we are wearing, what class of person would be wearing this style of dress?
These are mid-class, I would think. The style would be the same, upper and lower class. It's the quality of the fabric that changes. I've got just a cotton. I could be a shopkeeper's wife. I've got a little bit of money. I'm in style. Mrs. Lapenna is in style, but it's the quality of the cloth that makes a difference.
Well, another thing is, today we're so used to something wears out, right? Or something goes out of fashion. You pitch it or you get something new. My wife's family, they're from New York. And in their family, they had a dress. The dress dated from the 1830s, but it was worn into the 1840s. Mm-hmm. And you could see where the person had taken the dress, and they had altered it into the latest style.
Yeah.
Also, in military uniforms, an officer, for example, had to provide his own uniform. Government provided the enlisted personnel their uniform. Officers were responsible for their own. And on somebody making $20, $30 a month, that gets to be expensive.
That's pricey.
Especially when the uniform gets more ornate. And there was a Stephen Osmond, who ran Fort Snelling and is very knowledgeable in these things, had found a uniform, an 1820s dress uniform, which is a short-tailed coat. And then in the 1832 pattern, it goes to a longer pattern and a double-breasted. And he had examined the coat where it was given back to the tailor to modify. And the tailor picked out all the blind buttonholes, spliced the tail.
Oh, you're kidding.
It was one of the most amazing
Yeah.
things, I've ever seen. And it was like, I can't afford, the lieutenant is saying, I can't afford a new uniform here. I can pay the tailor X amount just to alter it. So people did not, we didn't
You
waste
don't pitch
anything.
it, no.
No.
No, there's a lot of examples of 18th century clothing remade into 1800, then later remade into 1815. Different styles, but yeah, you can see where the seams have been picked and resewn.
Right,
you don't waste fabric.
You don't waste it. That's the other thing. Brian Cushing. I gave Brian a gift of one of my tailcoats that I had made.
Yeah.
And I was given 1 5/8 yard of cloth by Larry Lozon, that friend of mine from Canada. And I decided, I'll just make myself a tailcoat out of that. And there's a term in tailoring called cabbaging. And cabbaging is where you take all the scraps and you put them together so you get more cloth out of it on areas you don't see, like on the inside here. So I took that and I made the exterior, the sleeves were too short, but there was a cuff that went over it. So I cabbaged a piece on, put a cuff on. But if you look at the inside, the linings, because linings back then are not what we consider linings today. Generally, the front that you can see here is lined in the body fabric. The tails were lined in the body fabric. A lot of times that would be cabbage. So if you look at the coat I gave Brian, especially on the inside and the tails, it's little tiny pieces of cloth.
It's like a jigsaw
It's like a
puzzle.
jigsaw
It's
puzzle
fantastic.
that has been whip stitched to make something.
You whip
Because-
stitch it and then you flatten it out.
Flatten it out. You
Yeah.
put it together and you whip stitch it around the edges and then flatten it. There's a coat, for example, a musician's coat that's at Fort Atkinson in Nebraska. And when you look on the inside of that coat, there's not a bigger piece of cloth, and I mean the entire chest is lined. There's not a bigger piece of cloth than this, but it's been cabbaged. But you're realizing the tailor is doing this.
Did they get money for that?
No.
Not much.
No, that was the thing. Labor was cheap. Cloth was expensive. So again, let's talk at the living history thing. If you're portraying a tailor or something like that, they always say, what does a tailor eat? Well, he gets cucumbers and hot goose. And of course, the cucumber is the thing you're pressing with. Hot goose is his iron. All right. And cabbage. Well, cabbage is the scraps of cloth. So in the tailoring trade, whatever scraps were left were yours. So you cut judiciously. So if I could, let's say, I was making a coat for Brian. We use that for him. And I've got this much cloth. And I said, well, if I cabbage this on the inside or whatever, I might have enough left to, make a vest front. And then I can sell that and make a profit. Mm-hmm. Now, you go down to my shop. My shop is like Fibber McGee's closet. There's fabric squirreled. And folks, I think Jimmy Hoffa's down there somewhere too. I don't know.
Could you explain Fibber McGee's
I thought you were going to ask me to
for
explain
the-
Jimmy Hoffa.
Oh, no.
But
no.
before he does that, I really want to fit this in because she asked it just a few minutes ago. Several minutes ago. Rolling Pastures Farm, how many items of clothing did the average person own in the early 1800s?
That is
Interesting,
an
good question.
excellent question. You can go through, and I'll just go through inventories.
Yeah, look at inventories.
You look at inventories, and you look at U.S. Army officer inventories. Mm-hmm. And the job of the major in a regiment, he was your first line field officer. You had major, lieutenant colonel, colonel. And the Army is like, we got to find something for these majors to do. So the U.S. Army comes up with this idea. Oh, they'll take care of dead soldiers' effects, dead officers' effects, and inventorying them, selling them, getting the money to the family, etc. And you find the most fascinating thing when you go through those inventory lists. there, especially from 1812, and you have some older officers that it's like, how many things do you own? I mean, they have 3 pairs of pants. How many shirts?
That's
how many
excessive.
They have tremendous amount. But the one that was most poignant to me, and you're reading through the list, was an officer that had been promoted from the ranks. So he had been a sergeant. He was a lieutenant. He died. This is up in on the Canadian front, and they're inventorying his effects, and all he has is a knapsack, the feather for his plume.
Oh,
he has an epaulette, his coat, a shirt, a blanket, and his trousers. That's it. That is all he had. And then you look at the other guys that have candlesticks, and they have this, and they have that. So looking at people back then is no different than looking at people today.
But if you look at inventories here in Switzerland County, which we've done extensively, we found Mrs. Varon, who had how many fine shifts, how many common shifts. She had clothes. I can't remember the number now. It was in August afternoon. But she had the clothes for whatever reason. And they enumerated those in the transfer of when her husband died, it went to her son, and she was enumerating what she had.
No, sometimes it's amazing. And you have some living historians, again, we go back and putting this in a living historian point of view. You will have some living historians say, oh, you can't have that, you can't have this. Oh yes, you can.
Yeah.
But on the other hand is, you got to carry it. You are responsible for it. So let's again go acting is believing. I'm going to portray this particular character. So I need to make sure all of this equipment, nobody else is going to get it there. And that's sometimes, you see this especially in the military end, of guys that want to be officers and all of this other stuff. And they want to dress the part and do all that other stuff. And then you go, well, you better do this, better do that. And all of a sudden they go, oh, I'll just be a private again. Okay? So living history, again, let's go back again. Why it's so important is because, as Shakespeare says, it holds the mirror up to nature, and it reflects back at nature itself. And that's why I think it's so important, and that's why this generation of living historians, us, those of us, you've done it for years, I've done it for years, our friends, my wife, we've all done it decades, not a few, decades worth. I think we've come to a crossroads for us. I hear so many times from people, oh, the graying of the hobby, meaning everybody's getting old. Well, the good actor knows when to get off stage. I can't portray this anymore. One day I looked in the mirror and I said, Steve, you are not the dashing young officer you always thought you were. You're now, getting near a septuagenarian here. And it's time, those years ago, that I retired from it and passed it on to other people. But I didn't want to quit. I still wanted to tell stories.
Yeah, but what you're doing now with Venoge lets you use the creativity and the knowledge you've got.
Which is why our YouTube channel, I think, is so important. Is we can take people around the world and tell them stories 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
And recipes.
And recipes, medicinals, all of those things. And really bad outtakes from things that never make it onto the screen. So that's why I think all this stuff is so important. So the task of our generation, when we came into this, it was everybody grabbed a gun, they marched around the field, they cooked stew over that's what it was.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
All right. But now we've become older, we've become wiser. And again, Donna, look around you. You did this. If you hadn't walked into this building,
I know.
You and Tom, none of this would be here. If you didn't have a dream, none of this would be here. If we didn't have a dream for this YouTube channel and telling these stories, so this is our task now. Our job is to tell these stories to a future generation, like we did with watching Wonderful World of Disney or whatever. And we need to inspire them so they will pick up the torch and they will carry on.
But what I saw, and you know this very well because we've talked about this, what I saw, because I spent so many years with my nose to the floor, the ceiling, counting nail holes when we were restoring, I could see the people building the house. I could not see the people living in the house. And Steve was the one that had the forethought or looked at a different way, because he didn't spend 10 years on his knees looking at nail holes, to the life of the people that lived
Correct.
in the house.
And so we married the two together.
Yes.
What is, you can come here and you can see the material culture. And believe me, folks, if you've never been here, the material culture is pretty amazing. There is more pottery in this house than was an entire Switzerland county.
Well, I wouldn't go that
1828.
far. But we know a lot of people that do reproduction work, and we love their work. And we support them, and we buy them, and we use them. Right. It's all used.
So
But what
speaking of
yes.
the house, viewer Uriah, I would love to build a hearth like that in my home. So I mentioned it's
Rumford.
Rumford. I didn't know quite how to spell it, but I did answer him and said it's a Rumford
Yeah.
style, not sure on the spelling.
Yeah, it's Rumford, but we had the mantle, so that gave us the outside dimensions, and from there we extrapolated. But what else we had was the fireplace mass underneath that, which had failed, and so we've then we're able to put in the hearth and the trim board. If you go to our video, A Small Place I Wrote You About, you'll see how we use detective work to figure out how this stuff worked.
If you ever, like I said, when Don and I were putting that video together, I had never seen a lot of the stuff, the photographs and things that she had taken.
The stuff that I know.
When they were restoring this house. When I first came here, this was the house. It was done and everything was ready. Cool. But then we started putting this together, and we had John Marsh, who led the construction team, and Terry Woolenweber, who did the plastering, and they were telling us...
And Sonny Asher did a lot of sleuth work.
And they were telling stories. And then Donna started pulling out the pictures. If you see this place, folks, you go and watch that video, and you see what this place, what they were working with at one point, my solution would have been a box of matches.
That
and a
was
can of
never
gasoline.
my solution.
No.
That was
But
never a possibility.
what they did to save this structure is an amazing journey. So check that out. And then, of course, every restoration needs a restoration.
A re-restoration.
So we did a video about...
10 minute. Or was it 5 minutes? 5 minutes, yes.
All right. About the restoration of the restoration. And so, you know, Donna is very nice. I get to come up here and help her once a month, producing the videos. And we have a lot of dreams that we still want to do in telling the story of early Indiana, of early America, and of people that are no different than you. Okay? I'm just going to go back. If the past isn't relatable to the present, it doesn't have any value. So what we want to do is to create these videos that you can enjoy 24/7 and learn something. And we bring in wonderful people. Again, we mentioned Brian Cushing and Amy Liebert with their channel, The
Lance
Victorian.
Minnis is going to
and
be one of
Lance
our
Minnis,
guests.
all right, and Brian and Amy were our Jacob and Charlotte.
Yeah,
they
they're
were the
Jacob- they
embodiment
are
of the
Jacob
Weavers,
and
and to us, they always will be.
Yes.
Oh, and just on a slight note, the movie that we did, To Make a Beginning, to show you how technical things have changed. We did that in 2019. We started filming it. And of course, it's like, oh, we're going to put it on DVD. Everybody has a DVD. No, nobody has DVDs anymore. So there are so many of you who have never seen that show. So what Donna... So what Donna came up with the idea was, we're going to take it, we're going to do a little re-edit, and we're going to put it in 2 chapters on our YouTube channel.
Are we really 2?
It's a 50... Okay.
Whatever.
Whatever. Have another drink.
To be determined.
All right, and...
I did. I've been through 3.
Scaring me. And...
You're driving. Oh.
Thank you for your support.
You're welcome.
All right, and so what we want to do is to make that available to all of you. You can see it.
It's a great story.
It's an
comes straight from
amazing
Jacob's
story.
letters.
And there were so many things, of course, we couldn't portray
No.
in the story. But the other thing, again, you talk about Donna now seeing people.
I can see the people that lived here.
We went on a quest to find Charlotte and Jacob's grave. We're going to do a video on that. We're going to do a video on
What
where-
happened to Jacksonville?
What happened to Jacksonville?
That's where
the town,
Jacob and Charlotte moved after 1839.
the town they moved to.
It's gone.
And you go to the cemetery, and you stand there at the grave, and it's a broken stone. My goal is I want to see it put upright and restored. But you go, I've been to your house. I've read your letters. And in some way, I know you.
You're a real person.
You're a real person to me. And that's when you realize your journey as a living historian has come full circle, where I know this person.
You're important.
You're important, and your story is still important.
So thank you so much for joining us this evening on our first Venoge Fireside stream.
Do we have any other questions before
Are
we
there
go?
any questions?
We've had several comments. They love the channel, Uriah.
Yay.
The tongue-in-cheek is so funny. it is.
You get another
And,
drink, you'll see how funny it is.
Yes, and we also had some input from Joseph Hawkinsmith, who gave us the right spelling. I answered Rumsford as I always say it wrong, but anyway, he gave us the information and a YouTube channel that shows the building of the
Wonderful.
fireplace. So I thank him for that, helping me out. I really appreciate it. So I just want to thank all of you listeners and subscribers for witnessing our very first live stream.
Can I add one more?
It's been an
one more thing?
interesting day.
Yes, it's been a very interesting day. And it's going to get very interesting over the next 48 hours, especially with the weather changing here.
Oh, yes.
We're
We're
filming.
filming.
We're filming on Saturday, the next episode.
Sunday and Monday.
Of
Yes.
Tales from the Tavern. So if you haven't seen that series, all the stories that are in that series are true.
They come
We
from-
took Jacob Weaver's letters, we took Perry Dufour's early Switzerland County history, and we've created these characters. And we have 2 more episodes. We have one that's in the edit and this one. And if you can journey through them, you're going to be with us at the Eagle Tavern. I can see the tavern
is the
cage
Eagle
right over. This is
Tavern,
the Eagle
yes.
Tavern. And again,
Rooms to let upstairs.
that's right, and space in the stable for your horse.
Yes.
So again, Donna, thank you for the privilege,
pleasure, Mr.
the
Abel.
privilege of allowing me to be your first guest.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you very much. Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening, everybody.